The sun over Northwood University was a pale, forgiving gold, the kind that made the red brick buildings look like they'd been plucked from a postcard. I used to love this light, used to see it as a blessing on the 3 years I'd spent with Liam. Now as I walked across the quad, my hand tucked securely in his, the warmth felt like a lie. Everything with Liam had started to feel like a carefully curated performance. I was the supporting actress in the epic of Liam Hayes, star quarterback, business major prodigy and campus royalty. My lines were rehearsed. Laugh at his jokes, look adoringly during his stories, smooth over the social wrinkles he was too busy or too important to notice. "You're quiet today, Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble I'd once found comforting. Now it just felt like a script note. I squeezed his hand, a hollow gesture. "Just thinking about my photography project. The light's perfect this morning." He hummed, not really listening. His eyes were scanning the quad, a CEO surveying his domain. "We're meeting the guys at the Omega Fountain in 10. Don't want to be late." It always meant I was to be presentable, agreeable, on his arm. My own plans, my photography major, which he dismissively called my artsy hobby, were perpetually secondary. We reached the heart of campus, the sprawling green lawn everyone just called the college green. It was buzzing with the mid-morning energy of students rushing to class, lounging on blankets or clustered around coffee carts. This was our stage, and Liam never missed a cue. That's when we saw her. Chloe. The campus green tea, as the online forums so aptly labeled her, sweet and innocent on the surface, but with a bitter, manipulative aftertaste. She was surrounded by a giggling clique, but her eyes, wide and doe-like, were locked onto Liam. "Liam. Hey," she called, her voice a sugary chirp. She floated towards us, a vision in a pastel pink sweater and a short plaid skirt, her blonde hair catching the sun like a halo. "I was just telling the girls about that amazing play you made at last week's game. You were incredible." Liam's posture straightened, his chest puffing out almost imperceptibly. I felt my own spine stiffen in response. This was a familiar dance. Chloe would lavish him with praise, and Liam, who thrived on adoration, would lap it up. I used to brush it off, telling myself he was just being polite, that he was oblivious to her blatant flirting. But lately his obliviousness felt willful. "It was nothing, Chloe," he said, a practiced modesty in his tone that didn't reach his eyes. They sparkled with the attention. "Just did my job." "Oh, stop, you're too modest." She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her laughter like wind chimes. Her eyes flickered to me for a nanosecond, a silent, dismissive glance that said, "You're still here?" I didn't say anything. I just watched them, my camera bag feeling heavy on my shoulder. I'd learned that any sign of jealousy from me only made Liam feel more powerful and gave Chloe more ammunition. So I stood there, a silent, stoic statue, while my boyfriend and the campus siren performed their little duet. Later, as we walked to his business lecture, he squeezed my hand. "You know you have nothing to worry about with Chloe, right, Elle? She's just a fan." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like a rug being pulled out from under me. He saw her as a fan and admirer while I was the girlfriend. But in that moment the roles felt dangerously blurred. The gilded cage I'd been living in was starting to feel less like a privilege and more like a prison, the bars painted in the colors of his ambition and my own silence. That afternoon, hiding in the red glow of the campus darkroom, I found my solace. The chemical smell was a comfort, the process of watching an image emerge from nothing, a kind of magic Liam would never understand. I was developing shots I'd taken of the old campus clock tower. In one, a single bird was caught in mid-flight, a stark, free silhouette against the weathered stone. As I pinned the print to the drying line, my phone buzzed. A text from Liam. "Big party at the Kappa house Friday. Be ready by 8. It's a big deal for the team." I stared at the message, then back at the photograph of the bird. The contrast was a physical ache in my chest. I typed out a reply, my fingers hovering over the send button. "I have a project deadline. Maybe I'll meet you there later." I deleted it. 3 years of conditioning were hard to break. I simply typed, "Okay." But as I left the darkroom, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the word echoed in my mind. How many times had I said it? How many parts of myself had I folded away to fit into the neat, convenient box labeled Liam's girlfriend? The cage door was still shut, but for the first time I was seriously thinking about the lock. The Kappa Sigma house thrummed with a bass line you could feel in your teeth. Colored lights strobed across a sea of gyrating bodies, and the air was thick with the sweet smell of cheap beer and expensive perfume. I stood by the wall, a glass of warm, untouched punch in my hand, feeling like a ghost in my own skin. I'd let Liam pick my dress. A tight, black number he said looked hot. Felt like a costume. Liam was in his element, holding court in the center of the room. A circle of teammates and admirers hung on his every word as he reenacted his latest touchdown. His laughter was too loud, his gestures too broad. I watched him from a distance, my photographer's eye framing the scene. The golden boy, the center of his own universe. And then, like a magnet finding its true north, Chloe appeared at his side. She wasn't in pastels tonight. She wore a shimmering silver dress that clung to her every curve, and she looked up at Liam with an expression of rapturous awe that was too perfect to be real. My stomach tightened. I took a deliberate sip of the punch, the syrupy sweetness making my throat ache. A presence materialized beside me. He seems busy. I turned to find Kalen standing there. Kalen Thorne. The enigma of Northwood. He was a transfer student in his final year, a physics major rumored to be some kind of genius. He wasn't like the jocks or the business brothers. He was quieter, more observant, with an intensity in his stormy gray eyes that could silence a room. He was, by universal whispered agreement, the hottest guy on campus, but he wore it with an air of profound indifference that made him utterly unapproachable. We'd been partners in a mandatory interdisciplinary class last semester, art and astrophysics. While everyone else struggled to find common ground, we'd found a strange, quiet synergy. He'd explained the physics of light in a way that finally made sense for my photography, and I'd shown him how to see the art in the equations. We'd shared a few late nights in the library, surrounded by books and empty coffee cups, talking about everything and nothing. It was the most intellectually stimulating companionship I'd had in years, but I'd kept it strictly professional, a secret garden I tended away from the glaring spotlight of Liam's world. You could say that, I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. Kalen followed my gaze. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence was more eloquent than any judgment. He simply leaned against the wall next to me, a solid, calm presence amidst the chaos. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt, a stark contrast to the peacocking all around us. "How's the Nebula project?" I asked, desperate to anchor myself in a conversation that didn't revolve around football or social climbing. A faint smile touched his lips. "It's coming along. I've been trying to capture the data for the Horsehead, but the light pollution is a nightmare. It's like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane." The metaphor hit a little too close to home. "I get that," I murmured. On the dance floor, Chloe was now pressed against Liam, her arms draped over his shoulders as they swayed to a slow song. His hands were on her waist. It wasn't a fan interaction anymore. It was intimate. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. My knuckles were white around my glass. "You don't have to stand here and watch this, Ilara," Kalen said, his voice low for my ears only. It wasn't a plea or a command. It was a simple statement of fact, an acknowledgement of my own agency that felt revolutionary. Before I could respond, the music dipped and Liam's voice, loud and slurred, cut through the haze. "There's my girl." He was stumbling towards me, pulling a giggling Chloe by the hand. His eyes were glassy, his tie loosened. The golden boy was tarnished. "Oh baby." Chloe was just saying how she wishes she had a relationship as solid as ours. He slung a heavy arm around my shoulders, pulling me stiffly against his side. The smell of whiskey on his breath was overwhelming. Chloe clung to his other arm, her smile a sharp little knife. "It's true," she cooed. "You two are like #relationship goals." The irony was so thick I could taste it. I tried to extricate myself, but Liam's grip was like a vice. "We are, aren't we?" Liam boomed, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring he had an audience. He'd always needed one. His gaze then landed on Kalen, who was watching the entire spectacle with an unervingly calm expression. A flicker of challenge lit in Liam's eyes. Kalen's quiet intensity was a threat to his noisy dominance. This was it. The moment I realized the performance was no longer for my benefit, or even for Chloe's. It was for everyone. It was for the guy standing silently beside me, a living reproach to Liam's hollow showmanship. Liam looked down at Chloe, then back at me. His smile was a cruel, twisted thing. "You know what solid couples do?" he announced, his voice carrying over the music. "They trust each other." And then, in a move that felt both horrifically inevitable and utterly shocking, he cupped Chloe's face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was a deep, passionate, claiming kiss, right in the middle of the dance floor, in front of the entire party, in front of me. The world screeched to a halt. The music faded into a dull roar in my ears. I saw the shock on the faces around us, the whispered, "Oh my gods," the phones being lifted to capture the drama. I saw Chloe's hands clutch at Liam's shirt, her triumphant eyes meeting mine over his shoulder. And I saw Liam as he finally broke the kiss, his eyes immediately seeking me out. They were bright with a vicious, expectant glee. He was waiting for it. Waiting for the tears, the screaming, the dramatic scene where I would break down and prove how much he meant to me. He was waiting for my pain to be the grand finale of his performance. For a heartbeat I was frozen. The humiliation was a physical wave, hot and suffocating. I felt the sting of tears, the primal urge to shatter. But then my gaze shifted. I found Kalen. He hadn't moved. His gray eyes were locked on me, not on the spectacle. In them I saw no pity, no morbid curiosity. I saw a quiet, simmering anger, and beneath that, a question. "What are you going to do now?" In that suspended second, something inside me, something that had been bending for 3 years, didn't break. Snapped back hard and true. Liam's smirk was beginning to falter, confusion replacing his anticipation. The crowd was holding its breath. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Chloe. I let the glass of punch fall from my hand. It hit the sticky floor with a dull thud, but the sound was lost in the music. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I took a single step away from the wreckage of my relationship. And I walked straight toward Kalen. I stopped in front of him, the chaos of the party a blur around us. The air crackled. His eyes widened just a fraction, the only sign of his surprise. "Get me out of here?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady. Without a word, without a single glance at the stunned crowd or my gaping ex-boyfriend, Kalen offered me his arm. It was a simple, old-fashioned gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. I took it. And as he led me through the parted crowd, away from the toxic ruins of my old life, I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just walked, my head held high, into the quiet, uncertain, but infinitely more promising night. The cold night air hit my face like a physical slap, shocking me back into my body. The bass from the Kappa house faded into a dull, rhythmic thump behind us, a dying heartbeat. Kalen's arm was a solid, warm presence under my hand, his silence a sanctuary. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just walked, his pace steady, leading me away from the circus. We ended up at the 24-hour campus diner, a place with sticky vinyl booths and the smell of stale coffee and grease. It was nearly empty, inhabited only by a few bleary-eyed students cramming for exams. The fluorescent lights were harsh and unflattering, a stark contrast to the party's strobes. It felt real. Sliding into a booth, I finally let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. My hands were trembling. I clasped them together on the Formica table to still them. Kalen sat opposite me, his gaze steady. A waitress with tired eyes brought us 2 mugs of coffee without us asking. He pushed the sugar dispenser towards me. I don't know what to say, I started, my voice a rasp. "Thank you. For that." He shook his head, a single, dismissive motion. "You don't have to thank me." He took a sip of his black coffee. "What do you need?" The question was so simple yet so profound. Liam would have already been crafting the narrative. How dare she must be hysterical, I'll have to smooth this over. Kalen just asked what I needed. "I think I just need to not be alone," I admitted, the truth of it surprising me. "But I also don't think I can handle talking about that." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hey, we don't have to talk." And we didn't. We sat in that comfortable silence for what felt like an eternity. I watched the steam rise from my mug, tracing its lazy spiral towards the ceiling. I replayed the moment in my head, the look on Liam's face, the expectant glee, the way it had curdled into confusion as I walked away. The image was no longer one of searing humiliation. It was one of profound, pathetic weakness. His weakness. "He thought I would cry," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Kalen's eyes met mine. "I know. He wanted a scene." He wanted to be the center of a drama where he was so desirable, two women were fighting over him. I know. I looked at him, really looked at him. The sharp line of his jaw, the intensity in his stormy eyes, the quiet confidence that didn't need an audience. How do you know? He leaned back in the booth. Because men like him are predictable. Their currency is attention. They think causing pain is the same thing as having power. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Walking away was the one thing he didn't have a script for. It was the most powerful thing you could have done. His words weren't comforting, they were validating. They reframed the entire event from a public humiliation to a strategic withdrawal. He saw the mechanics of it, the physics of social dynamics, and he'd correctly identified my action as the variable that broke the equation. I felt a small, fragile smile tug at my own lips. It felt good. I bet it did. My phone started to vibrate on the table, lighting up with Liam's name. Then again. And again. Followed by a string of texts. "I'll call me. You're overreacting. I was drunk. Where are you?" "With him. We need to talk about this. You're making a scene." I was making a scene. The audacity was almost impressive. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady now. I didn't read the messages. I went straight to his contact, hit block, and did the same for his number. Then for good measure I opened my social media apps and blocked him there too. It was a digital severing, clean and surgical. I placed the silent phone back on the table. There. Kalen watched the whole process, a look of approval in his eyes. Efficient. The rest of the weekend passed in a strange, peaceful bubble. I ignored the whispers and sidelong glances on campus. I spent Sunday in the darkroom, losing myself in the alchemy of developing film. The images that emerged were stronger, more contrasty than my usual work. They felt true. On Monday morning, walking to my first class, the bubble popped. Liam was waiting for me by the steps of the arts building, leaning against the brick wall like a brooding romance novel cover. He looked tired, his usual polished perfection slightly rumpled. "Elara," he said, stepping in front of me. "We need to talk." I stopped but didn't close the distance between us. "There's nothing to talk about, Liam." "Don't be like that," he said, his voice a low, practiced plea. "I made a mistake. A huge, stupid mistake. I was drunk and Chloe. She came on to me and I wasn't thinking. The old script. Blame the alcohol, blame the other woman. Take no real responsibility. It's not about the kiss, Liam," I said, and the truth of that statement resonated through me. It was about the performance. You did it because you thought you could. You did it to prove a point to me, to him, to everyone. You treated me like a prop in your show. I'm not interested in that role anymore." He looked stunned, as if I'd started speaking in tongues. This wasn't the script. Where were the tears? The begging? The negotiation? "So what, you're just done? 3 years and you're just done?" His voice rose, edged with a petulant anger. "You're going to run off with Kalen Thorne? What, because he's the hottest guy on campus? That's pathetic, Elle. You're just trying to make me jealous." I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that made him flinch. "You see, you still don't get it. This isn't about you. My life, my choices, are not about you anymore." I saw the confusion in his eyes morph into something darker, something uglier. The loss of control was eating at him. "You'll regret this," he spat, his mask of contrition slipping entirely. "You're nothing without me. Who are you going to be? Just some weird art girl with a camera?" The words were meant to wound, but they landed on newly fortified ground. They sounded hollow, a desperate incantation from a losing player. "I guess I'll find out," I said calmly. I adjusted the strap of my camera bag on my shoulder, a gesture that now felt like a declaration of identity. "Goodbye, Liam." I walked past him and up the steps without a backward glance. I half expected to feel a pang of loss, the ache of a 3-year habit being broken. But all I felt was light. Unburdened. As I pushed through the heavy doors of the arts building, I left the ghost of who I used to be standing on the steps, slowly realizing that his favorite audience had just walked out for good. Life after Liam developed a new, quieter rhythm. The initial storm of gossip died down, replaced by the mundane current of midterms and assignments. My world, which had once revolved around the stadium and frat parties, now consisted of the library, the darkroom, and surprisingly, the university observatory. Kalen hadn't asked me out on a date. There was no formal, awkward transition. Our companionship simply continued. It was born from that night at the diner, a shared understanding that felt older and more solid than any dramatic declaration. We were two people who found a strange sense of peace in each other's company. A week after the party, I found a note slipped under my door in the campus apartments. It was on thick, textured paper, his handwriting a precise, angular script. Alara, the seeing should be good tonight at the observatory. Around 10. If you're not busy. Hey. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation to a world I knew nothing about. I went. The observatory was a cold, cylindrical room at the top of the physics building, smelling of ozone and old books. Kalen was there, hunched over a complex-looking telescope, his brow furrowed in concentration. Hey, I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, and the focused intensity in his eyes softened when he saw me. Hey, you came. He gestured to the telescope. I'm just calibrating. Jupiter is particularly clear tonight. For the next 2 hours he showed me the universe. Not through the romantic poetic lens I was used to, but through the stark, breathtaking reality of physics. He pointed out Jupiter, a brilliant striped marble with 4 tiny pinprick moons lined up beside it. The Galilean moons, he called them. That's Io, he said, his voice low beside my ear as I looked through the eyepiece. The most volcanically active body in the solar system. A constant, violent rebirth. He then swung the telescope, his movements sure and practiced. And that is the Orion Nebula. A stellar nursery. Stars being born. I looked and the breath caught in my throat. It wasn't like the pictures. It was a faint, ethereal cloud of grayish-green light, a wisp of cosmic dust where suns were igniting. It was quiet. It was ancient. It made the drama of the Kappa house feel laughably insignificant. It's humbling, I whispered. That's the point, he replied. That became our routine. A few times a week I'd join him. Sometimes we'd talk about the absurdity of our art and science class, about a book he was reading, about my photography. Other times we'd work in companionable silence, me sketching the formations he showed me, him scribbling equations in a worn notebook. I learned that his intensity wasn't aloofness. It was a deep, consuming curiosity about how things worked. And he, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in my work. He didn't call it a hobby. One afternoon I was in the campus gallery setting up for the end-of-semester show. I had a series of black and white prints selected, all exploring themes of light and shadow. Kalen found me there, struggling to hang a particularly heavy frame. Let me, he said, easily lifting it and holding it in place while I secured the wire. He stepped back, his head tilted as he studied the photograph. It was the one of the clock tower with the bird, the one I'd developed the day everything fell apart. This is it, isn't it? He said quietly. What is? The moment you decided to leave the cage. I stared at him, a lump forming in my throat. He saw it. He saw the story in the silence, the metaphor in the composition. No one had ever looked at my work and seen me so clearly. Yeah, I breathed. It is. He didn't say anything else. He just reached out and squeezed my shoulder, a brief, solid gesture of understanding that felt more intimate than any kiss I'd shared with Liam. Meanwhile, Liam's attempts to reinsert himself into my narrative were becoming increasingly desperate. He'd accidentally run into me at the coffee cart, his conversations laden with nostalgic references to our song, or that trip we took. He'd send messages through mutual friends. Liam's really hurting, you know. It was all noise. Static on a frequency I was no longer tuned to. The real shift happened one evening at the library. I was with Kalen at our usual table in a secluded corner, surrounded by open astrophysics texts and my photography portfolios. We were debating the artistic merit of deep space radio telescope images. A ridiculous, wonderful argument that involved a lot of hand gestures and suppressed laughter. I felt a presence looming over us. I looked up. Liam was standing there, his face a thundercloud. He'd clearly been watching us, and the easy, natural chemistry between Kalen and me was a language he couldn't speak and a sight he couldn't bear. Having fun, Elle? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Kalen slowly looked up from his book. He didn't speak. He just fixed Liam with that calm, unnerving gaze. We're studying, Liam, I said, my voice flat. Something people do in libraries. His eyes darted between us, taking in our shared space, our stacked books, the intimate bubble we occupied. He saw the truth he'd been refusing to acknowledge. I had not only moved on, I had upgraded to a world he could never access. "This is what you want?" he sneered, gesturing vaguely at Kalen. "A library rat? You think this is better than what we had?" Kalen closed his book with a soft, definitive thud. He stood up, and though he and Liam were the same height, Kalen seemed to tower, his quiet authority a physical force. "The problem, Liam," Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft, "is that you're still talking about what you had. What you want. She's not your possession. She never was." He took a small step forward, his gray eyes like chips of flint. "The conversation is over. Walk away." The air crackled. Liam's jaw worked, his fists clenching and unclenching. He was a quarterback used to calling the plays, used to being the physical threat. But faced with Kalen's immovable intellectual confidence, he had no playbook. He was utterly disarmed. With a final furious glare at me, a look that was equal parts hurt and hatred, he turned on his heel and stalked away, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silent stacks. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Kalen sat back down, reopening his book as if he'd just swatted a fly. "You okay?" I looked at him, at the quiet strength he wore so effortlessly, and felt a surge of something warm and powerful. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of something else entirely. "Yeah," I said, a real unforced smile spreading across my face. "I'm better than okay." For the first time I truly believed it. I was on a different wavelength now, one tuned to the quiet hum of the universe and the steady, reliable frequency of a man who saw the stars in my soul and didn't feel the need to dim their light. The world began to repaint itself in sharper, more vibrant colors. It was as if I'd been living with a filter over my eyes for 3 years, a Liam-shaped filter that muted my own palette. Now the saturation was turned all the way up. The deep green of the college green seemed richer. The cobalt blue of the autumn sky felt deeper. Even the sound of my own laughter was different. Less rehearsed, more frequent, and entirely my own. My friendship with Kalen was the anchor in this new, brighter world. It was built not on grand gestures or public displays, but on a foundation of quiet understanding. We didn't need to be the center of attention. In fact, we actively avoided it. Our time together was a series of stolen, peaceful moments. We spent one rainy afternoon in the astrophysics department's common room, a space that smelled of old coffee and whiteboard markers. Kalen was trying to explain the concept of quantum entanglement to me, drawing shaky diagrams on a napkin. "So, 2 particles," I said, frowning in concentration, "can be linked no matter how far apart they are? If something happens to one, the other one just knows? Instantly." "Yes," he said, his eyes lighting up with that particular fervor he got when talking about physics. "Spooky action at a distance. They remain connected, a single system." I looked from the napkin to his face and a slow smile spread across my lips. "It sounds like friendship." He paused, his marker hovering over the napkin. He looked at me, a long, considering look, and then a genuine, unguarded smile broke through his usual seriousness. "Yeah," he said softly. "I suppose it does." It was moments like these that felt more intimate than any crowded party ever had. We were 2 particles, entangled, understanding each other on a fundamental level that required no explanation. This new equilibrium I'd found was, of course, an affront to Liam. My silence, my apparent happiness, was a constant, gnawing rebuke to his ego. He couldn't stand that I wasn't pining, that the campus narrative had shifted from poor Ilara to Ilara and the hot physics genius, a title that clearly grated on him more than any insult. His attempts to re-engage became more pathetic. He started showing up at the cafe where Kalen and I often studied, always with a different girl from the cheerleading squad in tow, performing a pantomime of having the time of his life. He'd laugh too loudly, throw an arm around his date, his eyes constantly darting to our table to see if we were watching. We weren't. We were usually arguing about the philosophical implications of the multiverse, or I was showing him how to use the manual settings on my old film camera. Liam's performances were like a faint, annoying buzz in the background, a mosquito we simply chose to ignore. The real turning point came with the annual fall festival. It was a campus-wide event, with food stalls, live music, and games spread across the college green. The previous year I'd spent the entire day following Liam from one team huddle to another, holding his jacket and smiling until my face ached. This year was different. I was manning a booth for the photography club, selling prints to raise funds. I'd chosen my strongest work, the contrasty, more emotional pieces I'd developed after the breakup, including the clock tower and bird photo. I'd priced them with a confidence that would have been unthinkable months ago. The festival was in full swing, the air filled with the scent of candied apples and the sound of a folksy indie band. I was making a sale to a freshman when I felt a familiar presence at my side. He didn't say anything, just picked up a print of a long exposure shot of the star trails over the observatory. "This one's good," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You would say that. It's your office." "It's our office," he corrected without looking up, and my heart did a little flip. He bought the print, paying the full price despite my protests, and then simply stayed, leaning against the booth, a silent partner. His presence was a shield. When people approached, they didn't just see Liam's ex. They saw an artist and, whatever Kalen was to me. His quiet intensity commanded a respect that Liam's bluster never could. And then, as if summoned by the sheer force of my contentment, Liam appeared. He was with Chloe, of course, who was clinging to his arm like a delicate vine. They stopped in front of our booth. Liam's eyes scanned the prints, a condescending smirk on his face. "Selling your little pictures, Elle?" he said, his voice dripping with faux warmth. "Cute." Before I could respond, Kalen spoke, his tone conversational, almost bored. "The composition and technical execution are far from cute, Liam. But I wouldn't expect you to understand the difference between art and a jersey number." Liam's smirk vanished. Chloe's grip on his arm tightened. I felt a surge of fierce gratitude. This wasn't Kalen fighting my battles for me. It was him simply stating a fact, refusing to let Liam's narrative stand unchallenged. Liam's eyes narrowed, flicking between us. He was searching for a weakness, a crack in our united front. He found none. My posture was relaxed, my expression neutral. Kalen's was one of mild academic curiosity, as if observing a particularly simple organism. "You know, Alara," Liam said, switching tactics, his voice dropping into the intimate, manipulative tone he used to use when he wanted something. "I saw your favorite band is playing in the city next month. I could get tickets. For old time's sake. We could talk. Really talk." It was a masterstroke, a deliberate pull on the threads of our shared history. For a second, the ghost of the girl I used to be stirred, remembering the concerts, the whispered promises. But then I looked at Kalen. He wasn't looking at Liam. He was looking at me, his gaze steady and full of a quiet faith. He was giving me the space to answer, trusting me to hold my own line. I turned back to Liam, my smile polite and utterly final. "No thank you, Liam. I'm not interested in living in the past." I gestured to the prints around me. "I'm too busy creating my present." The defeat in his eyes was absolute. He had thrown his best, most sentimental punch and I hadn't even flinched. Chloe, sensing his deflation, tried to intervene. "Come on, Liam, let's go get a funnel cake. This is boring." He allowed himself to be led away, a hollowed-out version of the golden boy, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look back. As they disappeared into the crowd, I let out a long, slow breath. The victory wasn't in his retreat. It was in my own unwavering stance. I had chosen my present, a present I was deliberately building moment by moment, print by print. Kalen pushed off from the booth and stood beside me. "You handled that perfectly." "We handled it," I corrected. He shook his head, a small, proud smile on his face. "No, that was all you. I just provided the background radiation." I laughed, the sound clear and happy. The sun was warm on my skin, my art was selling, and the man beside me saw me not as an accessory, but as a supernova in my own right. The bloom wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, cultivated in the fertile ground of my own freedom. And it was only just beginning. The fall festival had been a public declaration of my independence, but what followed was a private, quiet deepening. With Liam's pathetic attempts at interference finally silenced, the space between Kalen and me began to hum with a new, unspoken energy. We were still entangled particles, but the connection was shifting, intensifying, pulling us into a closer orbit. We fell into a new ritual. After our evenings at the observatory, he would walk me back to my apartment building. The first time he stopped at the bottom of the steps, a perfect gentleman. The second time he walked me to my door. The third time he lingered in the hallway, our conversation about the possibility of life on Europa stretching out, neither of us wanting it to end. "It's getting late," I'd said finally, my key in my hand, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "Right?" he'd replied, his hands shoved in his pockets. He'd stood there for another moment, his gray eyes searching mine in the dim fluorescent light. "Good night, Ilara." "Good night, Kaylin." He'd turned and walked away, and I'd leaned against my door, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade, my heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. It was the fourth time he walked me home that the tension snapped. We'd been talking about my senior photography project, a series I was titling Celestial Bodies, which aimed to capture the human form with the same awe and mystery he reserved for distant galaxies. The conversation was charged, intimate. We reached my door and the hallway was silent. The usual goodbye felt inadequate, a script from a past life. "I should let you go," he said, but he made no move to leave. "You don't have to," I whispered. The air between us seemed to crackle and warp, like space-time around a dense star. His gaze dropped to my lips and the world narrowed to this single point. This was the moment. A choice. To step back into the safety of friendship or to fall forward into the terrifying, exhilarating unknown. I chose to fall. I rose onto my toes, closing the small distance between us. My lips met his. It wasn't like any kiss I'd ever experienced. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a claim. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was slow and deliberate, a universe of feeling contained in a single perfect point of contact. His hands came up to cradle my face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who carried such immense intensity. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against my palm where I'd placed it on his chest. It was a kiss that felt like coming home to a place I'd never known I belonged. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time," he confessed, his voice rough. "How long?" I breathed. "Since you explained the rule of thirds to me in the library and got so passionately angry when I said it was arbitrary." I laughed, a watery, joyful sound. "That was months ago." "I'm a patient man," he murmured, his thumb stroking my cheek. "And some things are worth waiting for." From that night on, we were undeniably, unequivocally together. But it was a togetherness that existed in our own private cosmos. We didn't feel the need to announce it on social media or stage a grand reveal on the college green. Our relationship was in the shared coffee mug he kept at my apartment, in the way he'd absent-mindedly play with the strap of my camera bag while we walked, in the late-night conversations that ranged from the cosmic to the comically mundane. We did, however, exist in the world. We were seen. Studying together in the library, our chairs pushed close together. Grabbing lunch at the student union, his arms slung casually over the back of my chair. Walking across campus, our fingers intertwined. The news, of course, traveled. The narrative of Ilara and the hot physics genius was now confirmed, and it was a story far more compelling than the tired drama of a jock in a green tee. We were an enigma, and the campus, for once, was intrigued by something quieter. I knew it was only a matter of time before our path collided with Liam's again. The campus was only so big. The collision happened on a crisp, bright Tuesday afternoon. Kaylin and I were cutting across the green, heading towards the arts building. He was telling me about a breakthrough in his research, his face animated, and I was listening, captivated by the passion in his voice. We passed the Omega Fountain, the same spot where Liam had once demanded my punctuality. And there he was. Alone for once, sitting on the fountain's edge, looking lost. He saw us the same moment we saw him. His eyes, bleak and hollow, locked onto our joined hands. The change in Kaylin was immediate and subtle. His grip on my hand tightened, not possessively but protectively. His pace didn't falter, but his body shifted minutely, placing himself slightly between Liam and me. It was the instinct of a man guarding what he valued most. Liam stood up. Looked broken. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a slumped weariness. The golden boy was tarnished, the light in his eyes extinguished. He didn't say anything. He just stared, his gaze a torrent of regret, jealousy, and a dawning, horrifying comprehension. He was finally seeing me. Not as an extension of himself, not as a prize he'd lost, but as a whole person, independent and fulfilled. And he was seeing the man beside me, not as a rival to be defeated, but as a partner who complemented me in ways he never could. The understanding that dawned on his face was more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. It was the look of a man realizing he'd thrown away a diamond because he was too busy admiring his own reflection in a piece of glass. We walked past him without a word. There was nothing left to say. The silence in our wake was louder than any confrontation. Once we were out of earshot, I let out a shaky breath. Well, that was inevitable, Kalen finished. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his hands coming to rest on my hips. Are you okay? I looked into his steady gray eyes, seeing the entire universe of his care for me reflected in them. The ghost of Liam's broken expression flickered and faded, unable to compete with the vibrant, living reality in front of me. I'm more than okay, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. He finally saw it, didn't he? He finally saw that I moved on. Kalen's lips curved into that rare, devastating smile. He didn't just see that you moved on, Alara, he said softly, his voice full of a quiet, fierce pride. He saw that you moved up. And as he leaned in to kiss me again, right there in the middle of the bustling path, I knew he was right. I hadn't just traded one man for another. I had graduated from a shaky, performative foundation to something solid, something real, something built on the unshakable laws of physics and the even more powerful force of a love that felt written in the stars. The sight of Liam's broken expression should have felt like a victory. In a way it was. It was the final silent acknowledgement of my freedom, the receipt for a debt I no longer owed. But a strange melancholy settled over me in the days that followed. It wasn't for him, not really. It was for the 3 years I'd wasted, for the girl who had willingly made herself small for a love that was never really there. I found myself drawn to my photography with a new urgency. My Celestial Bodies project became my therapy. I convinced Kalen to let me photograph him not as a model but as a subject. I shot him in the observatory, his profile silhouetted against the massive telescope, a man communing with the infinite. I captured the intense focus in his eyes as he scribbled equations, the way the light from his laptop screen carved out the sharp planes of his face in the dark. The photos were intimate, powerful. They were a love letter in film grain. Kalen, in his infinitely perceptive way, understood my quiet mood. He didn't push. He simply made space for it. One evening he showed up at my door with a thermos of hot chocolate and a determined look. We're going for a drive, he announced. He drove us out of the city limits, away from the light pollution, to a secluded hilltop overlooking a sleeping valley. He spread a blanket in the bed of his pickup truck, and we lay there side by side looking up at a night sky unveiled. It was breathtaking. The Milky Way stretched above us, a vast, swirling river of diamond dust. It was the universe Kalen lived in every day, but seeing it like this, raw and unobstructed, was a spiritual experience. I come here when the numbers stop making sense, he said, his voice quiet in the immense silence. It reminds me that the chaos is part of the design. That there's a beauty in the collapse of a star, because it seeds the universe with the elements for new life. I turned my head to look at him. The starlight caught the silver in his eyes. He was talking about more than astrophysics. He was giving me a language for my own grief. Is that what I'm feeling? I asked softly. The collapse of a star? Yes, he said, turning to face me. You're letting the old patterns die. The gravity of what you had with him couldn't sustain itself, so it collapsed. It's painful. It's chaotic. But it's necessary. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. And from that collapse you're creating something new. Something stronger and more beautiful. You, Alara, are in your nebula phase. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of profound relief and understanding. He saw the entire cosmic cycle in my heartbreak. He wasn't dismissing my past. He was placing it within a grand, universal narrative where it was a necessary step in my evolution. I kissed him then, under the infinite tapestry of stars, and it felt like a sacrament. The collapse he spoke of wasn't just happening within me. We learned through the campus gossip mill that Liam was truly falling apart. He'd been skipping practices, his grades were plummeting, and he and Chloe had a very public, very messy breakup in the middle of the student union. The story, relayed with gleeful horror by my roommate, was that Chloe had called him a sulking loser, and he'd screamed that she was a shallow gold digger before overturning a table of magazines. The golden boy was tarnishing in real time, his carefully constructed image cracking under the weight of a consequence he'd never anticipated. The final act of his downfall came on a Friday night. The annual Chancellor's Gala, a formal event for donors and top students, was being held in the grand ballroom. I was there because my Celestial Bodies project had won a prestigious arts award. Kaylin was there as a recipient of the physics department's highest scholarship. We were a picture. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue gown, and Kaylin wore a tailored black suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a spy thriller. We weren't holding hands or clinging to each other, but the connection between us was palpable. We moved as a unit, talking with professors and donors, his hand a steadying presence on the small of my back. It was everything Liam had ever wanted: the recognition, the prestige, the approval of the establishment. And we were there not as accessories but as honored guests in our own right. He saw us from across the room. He was with his parents, who looked strained and disappointed. Liam was swaying slightly, a glass of champagne dangling from his fingers. His tuxedo was rumpled, his tie crooked. The contrast between his disheveled state and our composed presence was stark. The award ceremony began. When my name was called, Kaylin squeezed my hand and whispered, "Go get your nebula, superstar." I walked to the stage, my head high, and accepted the award. As I gave a short, graceful speech about finding light in the darkness, I saw Liam staring, his face a mask of utter devastation. He was witnessing the full, flourishing reality of the life he had tried to convince me was nothing without him. When I returned to our table, Kaylin pulled my chair out for me, his eyes shining with pride. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my temple. It was a small gesture, but it was full of a quiet, profound love that echoed through my entire being. It was that kiss, I think, that did it. That simple, public yet intensely private display of affection was the final straw. We heard a crash. Liam had dropped his champagne flute. The crystal shattered on the marble floor, a sound as sharp and final as a gunshot. Everyone turned. He was just standing there, staring at us, his chest heaving. The music faltered. His mother said his name, a sharp, embarrassed whisper. His father put a hand on his arm, but Liam shook it off. His face crumpled. The anger, the pride, the jealousy, it all dissolved, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished pain. A broken, ragged sob escaped his lips, a sound of such pure agony that a hush fell over the entire ballroom. He didn't say a word. He just stood there in the middle of that opulent room in front of the entire campus elite and broke down. Tears streamed down his face as his body was racked with silent, shuddering sobs. It was the complete and total collapse of a star. His parents quickly hustled him away, his father's arm firm around his shoulders, his mother's face pale with humiliation. The room was left in a stunned, awkward silence. I looked at Kaylin. His expression was somber but not surprised. He simply took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. The band started up again tentatively. The buzz of conversation slowly returned, louder now, buzzing with the scandal. I felt no joy in Liam's humiliation. No schadenfreude. Only a distant, quiet pity. He was a supernova of his own making, and the explosion was as destructive as it was inevitable. Kaylin leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "The collapse is complete," he murmured. "Now the new star can truly shine." And as I looked into his eyes, I knew I already was. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of whispers, but they rolled off me like water off a star-kissed stone. The campus, for a few dizzying days, was obsessed with the dramatic downfall of Liam Hayes. But scandals, like stars, have a brief, bright life before they fade into the background noise of the universe. Soon, the chatter was replaced by the frantic energy of finals, and life, my new, beautiful life, moved on. Liam withdrew from Northwood. The official story was that he was taking a personal leave of absence, but everyone knew he couldn't face the ruin of his own reputation. The golden boy was gone, his throne empty, his kingdom dissolved into memory. I felt a final quiet click of a door closing in my soul. There was no more looking back. My world now was a universe of my own making, and at its center was Kaylin. What had begun as a quiet understanding had blossomed into a love so deep and solid it felt like a fundamental law of nature. It was in the way he'd bring me coffee when I was pulling an all-nighter to print my final portfolio. It was in the way I'd quiz him on complex formulae, learning the language of his passion just as he had learned to see the world through my lens. Our 1-year anniversary fell on a night of a meteor shower. He drove us back to our hilltop, the same spot where he'd once explained the beauty of a collapsing star. The pickup truck was our familiar haven, a blanket and a thermos of tea our companions. The sky was clear, the air crisp. We lay in the truck bed, our shoulders pressed together, and watched the celestial fireworks. Streaks of light dashed across the velvet black, brief, brilliant lives that took my breath away. Perseids, Kalen murmured, his voice full of reverence. Bits of dust and rock from the comet's swift tuttle, burning up in our atmosphere. A final, glorious display. I turned to look at him. The meteors were reflected in his eyes, tiny supernovas in the gray galaxies of his irises. In that moment I was overwhelmed by the sheer improbable luck of it all. Of the infinite paths my life could have taken, I had stumbled onto this one, the one that led to him. Kalen, I said, my voice soft but sure in the vast quiet. I love you. He went perfectly still. He turned his head to look at me, the meteor shower forgotten. The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming, a focused gravity that pulled all of my being towards him. He'd never said the words, and I hadn't needed him to. His actions had been a constant, quiet sonnet. But I needed to say them. I needed to give voice to the supernova that had been building inside me for months. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch as gentle as it was certain. Elara, he began, his voice thick with an emotion so raw it made my heart ache. Loving you is the most logical and the most miraculous thing that has ever happened to me. You are the art in my equations, the light in my cosmos. I have loved you since the moment you walked away from a life that was too small for you and had the courage to ask me for a way out. I will love you until the last star in the universe winks out. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. He didn't just say he loved me. He wove it into the fabric of our shared universe, making it as eternal and undeniable as the physics he cherished. He kissed me then under the raining fire of the Perseids, and it was a vow. It was a promise of 1,000 more nights like this, of a lifetime of quiet conversations and intense passions, of building a universe for two. Later, as we drove back towards the sleeping city, I looked at the campus as we passed it. The college green was empty and peaceful in the moonlight. It was just a lawn now. A beautiful, ordinary space. The ghosts that had haunted it were gone. It no longer held any power over me. I thought of the girl I had been a year ago, standing on that same green, her hand in the grip of a boy who saw her as a prop. I thought of the tears she hadn't shed, the strength she hadn't known she possessed. I thought of the long, winding, painful and glorious path that had led me here, to this truck, to this man, to this life. My phone buzzed in my purse. Out of habit I glanced at it. It was a notification from the gallery where my Celestial Bodies series was now on permanent display. A new review. I opened it. The critic had written, Elara Vance's work captures the profound intimacy of the human experience, framing it within the grand cosmic scale. She finds the universes within us, the stardust in our souls. A breathtaking new talent. I showed it to Kalen at a red light. He read it, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. They finally see it, he said. They see what you saw all along, I replied. He took my hand and brought it to his lips, kissing my knuckles. I just saw you, Elara. The rest of the universe was just catching up. As we drove on, leaving the past firmly behind us, I knew he was right. The revenge hadn't been in moving on with the hottest guy. It had been in becoming the woman who was worthy of a love as vast and steady as the night sky. It had been in finding myself, and in the process finding a love that was written in the stars. And our story, I knew, was only just beginning. The end.